right? There's got to be something about law that enables it, right, by its very nature to guide conduct. Well, one such feature is that it consists of norms, okay? And I'm going to argue that another such feature is that some of those norms, at least some of those norms, are backed by the threat of a sanction. Okay, so there's this problem of legal normativity, right? We assume that law is normative in some sense, that it has some sort of reason-giving capacity. Okay, there are different formulations of the problem, the soft problem. And I honestly, I don't understand why anybody thinks this is a problem. How is it possible for the official acts of judges, legislatures, and executives to give rise to reasons for subjects to do something? Well, there's no mystery there. You can give me a reason to give you my money if you point a gun at me. We just have that capacity. By doing things that implicate our self-interest and our moral views, we can give other people reasons to do things. So that's just, I mean, there's no reason even to think about this problem. The hard problem. How do mandatory legal prescriptions create reasons for subjects to comply as a matter of conceptual necessity? What I want to claim here is that mandatory legal positions, this assumes that mandatory legal prescriptions are kind of built, they're equipped to give people reasons to comply. Okay, so the question is, how do we explain that? And I think that one of the reasons people have shifted from the hard problem to the soft problem is because they think that sanctions aren't a conceptually necessary feature of law. I want to argue that the only way to explain law's conceptual normativity is to suppose that mandatory legal prohibitions are backed by the threat of a sanction. Now, let me say something about why I use the phrase mandatory legal prescriptions. Not every norm that counts as a law counts as a mandatory prescription. For example, and this hung up John Austin. He wanted to claim that every legal norm was backed by the threat of a sanction, but then there were problems when you got to contract law. Right, because contract law, the laws governing the formation of contracts, they don't make you do anything. They don't make you do anything. You don't have to ever make a contract. So those norms they empower you to do certain kinds of things, to alter your legal relationships in certain kinds of ways, but they're not mandatory in the sense that a law that prohibits murder is mandatory. So mandatory legal prescriptions, okay, just to be clear, pick out a certain class of norms and specific prescriptions. Norms are general prescriptions, and then there are orders, which are specific prescriptions. Mandatory legal prescriptions include, for example, the norms of criminal law and court orders. And court orders, right, you want to see where the punch comes, the coercive punch comes in the law when it comes to the civil law. Every order that a judge makes is backed by the threat of a contempt sanction. So that's how contract law and a civil law, those enforcement mechanisms, they don't transform the norms of contract and say, tort law into mandatory legal prescriptions, but they constitute them as coercive. Okay. All right, so here's what I want to do. This was the thesis of coercion and the nature of law. There's a similar, I argue for a similar thesis in the nature of authority. The coercion thesis. A mandatory prescription counts as one of law only if it's backed by the threat of a sanction. Law is by nature coercive. All right, so the tricky part is, well, how in the world do you get to that? How am I going to get that? All right, I want to give you a sketch of the argument here, and then I'll flesh it out. I'm omitting some detail, but I'll fill that in as we go along. But to be honest, you don't need all the detail to get the main idea. I'm going to start from a claim that is uncontentious among positivists and anti-positivists as well, and that claim is It is a necessary condition for something to count as a legal system that is generally effective or efficacious in guiding behavior. Okay? Nobody disputes that. Hart was the first to articulate it. Nobody disputes it. Nobody. I mean, then it's not even talked about because that's just common sense, right? If everybody's ignoring a system of norms and doing whatever they want, then there's no legal system in force. What might be happening there is a revolution of some sort, but the legal systems are the kind, exist only when they are in force among a certain population, okay? And that is what's the idea. That's the idea that's expressed by the claim that you can't have a system of law that isn't efficacious in guiding behavior, at least generally so. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show that the claim that law is conceptually efficacious implies that law, by its nature, mandatory legal prescriptions by its nature, give rise to reasons to comply. And then I'm going to argue, in essence, the only possible explanation for the conceptual reason-giving capacity of mandatory legal prescriptions is that they're backed by the threat of a sanction. Okay, so let me just kind of sketch this argument here. I'll read it. If law is conceptually efficacious in inducing compliance with its mandatory prescriptions, right, getting people to do what it says, then law is conceptually normative in the sense that every mandatory prescription that counts as law gives rise to a reason to comply. If it doesn't give rise to a reason to comply, then it doesn't count as law. That's a very strong claim. All right, now the second claim has to do with the kinds of reasons that move us by our nature. There are certain kinds of considerations that move all of us because we're self-interested, because we're conscientious, because we're receptive to and we respond to beauty in certain positive ways. There are certain kinds of considerations that move everybody, any rational human being, that can't be reduced to more basic considerations, right? I mean, you hear people talk about legal reasons and institutional reasons. I'm talking about reasons here that are basic, absolutely basic, in the sense that you can't reduce them to something else. So there are only three irreducible kinds of reason to comply to which law could give rise. And I'm going to justify, I'll make the arguments. There are prudential reasons, right? Reasons that have to do with what's in your self-interest, and clearly, well, I'm making the argument now, sorry. Moral reasons and aesthetic reasons. It is false that mandatory legal prescriptions necessarily give rise to moral or aesthetic reasons. The aesthetic reasons is the easy part. If you think that there can be wicked systems of law, then you're committed to this. It is false that mandatory legal prescriptions necessarily give rise to moral